Hey everyone, I hope you're keeping well inside your bubbles. Today we're continuing on with the book of Joshua, reading from chapter 3 verses 1 to 6. Let's read it together. I'll be reading it from the New Living Translation. Early the next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites left Acacia Grove and arrived at the banks of the Jordan River where they camped before crossing. 3 days later, the Israelite officers went through the camp, giving these instructions to the people. When you see the Levitical priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, move out from your positions and follow them. Since you have never traveled this way before, they will guide you. Stay about half a mile behind them, keeping a clear distance between you and the Ark. Make sure you don't come any closer. Then Joshua told the people, "Purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you." In the morning, Joshua said to the priests, "Lift up the Ark of the Covenant and lead the people across the river." And so they started out and went ahead of the people. So our passage that we just read is the beginning of a larger story, the crossing of the Jordan River, which is a momentous feat. Here, the Israelites are still in the process of transitioning into a new season, as Grace mentioned earlier in our first online service 2 weeks ago. They're approaching the next hurdle, which is the river. We're going to look at how they tackle this as a nation, and it can be broken down into 3 steps: to stop, look, and listen. So the first step is to stop. The Israelites stopped and camped for 3 days at the banks of the river. If you read on to verse 15, it tells us that it tends to flood at the banks at that time of year, so they could have been flooded out at any moment. For some, stopping may have been the last thing that they'd wanted to do. We can certainly feel like we've been in similar situations in our own lives. Those times where we feel like we're doing absolutely everything we can just to keep our heads above the water. That's when we need to stop. Take a few deep breaths. Trust that God will get you through each hour and each day. The Bible says that God is a source of peace and rest, and we can lay our burdens down before Him. I remember clearly in my second year of uni, I had 2 days of exams in a row, and one on Friday, then one in the afternoon, and then Saturday morning. I was struggling to study for the second exam, having spent most of my study break on the first one. And late Friday evening, I decided that I would study through the night and maybe give myself 4 or 5 hours of sleep. When the exam rolled around, I barely remembered what I had crammed the night before. I was struggling to even stay awake in my exam, and I think I saw another guy falling asleep in the exam. Obviously, I ended up doing terribly that day, and I had learned my lesson. Sacrificing rest for more productivity can actually hinder us. If the Israelites pushed through without stopping to try and beat those floods, exhaustion could have set in. Remember that they'd already traveled a long way to get to the Jordan banks in the first place. Stop. It's okay to rest. Next, the Israelites were instructed to look, particularly at the Ark of the Covenant. In their time and context, this was the presence of God. One commentator describes it as the portable throne of Israel's divine king. They're told to keep a distance from the Ark of the Covenant, about half a mile, almost a kilometer. The Ark of the Covenant, God, is to go ahead of them. And in verse 4, we're given a reason why. Since you have never traveled this way before, they, which is the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, will guide you. The Israelites were entering unprecedented territory, uncharted waters. How many times have we heard those phrases in the news and media outlets in the last few weeks alone? Like the Israelites, our nation, and our world are facing things none of us have encountered before. But we can be assured that God is unchanging. Like the Ark of the Covenant that goes before the Israelites and guides them, so does God. In the same way the Israelites looked towards the Ark, we too need to look towards God. If you get stuck trying to look towards God, may I encourage you to keep Psalm 121 close to your heart and mind in this season. Personally, it's one that's popped up in my life a lot lately. We even looked at it a few months ago in church, which is why this passage comes to mind. I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. And thirdly, the Israelites listened. Throughout this time of preparing to cross the Jordan River, they were given a set of instructions to follow. Verse 5 sticks out in particular. Purify yourselves. Other translations also use the words consecrate or sanctify, which means to make yourself sacred, set apart, holy. In Joshua's days, that meant going through a massive cleansing ritual, and the Israelites took this very seriously. And while we're not expected to hop into the shower and start scrubbing so we can be holy, Romans 12 verse 1 tells us to offer ourselves as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. Again, the Israelites were given a reason behind this instruction. For tomorrow, the Lord will do great wonders among you. And we too need to be preparing ourselves for God to do great wonders among us. Offering ourselves as living sacrifices is a choice that we are to make regularly. It's telling God that we are available and willing to be used by Him. So what could being a living sacrifice to God look like, especially when we're in our bubbles? It could mean letting God transform you as you dedicate regular time with Him in prayer and in the scriptures. Or maybe it's praying for one another, for those in our church family, or those who are missing out on community due to the inability to meet in person. Check in with people. Are there any needs that they have that you could help fulfill? And the list isn't just limited to that. God's equipped you with your own set of skills and talents and things that you can provide and things that you can do in this time to be a living sacrifice for Him. Taking the steps to stop, look, and listen sounds simple. However, it isn't always the easiest thing to do. It requires us to lay down our pride, humble ourselves, and acknowledge that we don't always have it all together. It requires wholly trusting God with the unknown. But we've learnt from Joshua and the Israelites that God will guide us through the unprecedented times. We need to look towards Him and listen to what He has to say. God will use us if we allow Him. Take comfort that God is ever present in this season. God bless.